Professor Ian Harper, thank you so much for joining me to have a chat about
Jared.
automation and artificial intelligence.
Thank you.
I thought where we'd start, a lot of these discussions seem to go straight to anxiety about jobs and the displacement of workers. Interested in your perspective on what's history shown in these periods of automation that we've had in the past, because this is actually not that new. And should people be so anxious about employment, particularly if we look at some of the trends in the labour market at the present time?
Yeah. Well, the history of these things, as you point out, Jared, is long, right? So it's long been the case that both here in Australia, but of course, more broadly in the Western world, leading back to the Industrial Revolution of 1800, that technological change displaces some jobs and creates others. And on balance, it creates more jobs than it destroys, and those jobs are higher paying, and the economy becomes more productive and living standards rise. Right? So, in answer to the question, who's nervous about this and why should they be nervous? Well, yeah, it's one thing to say that more jobs are created than are destroyed, but if you've got one of those jobs that's destroyed, then you're worried about whether you can take one of the jobs that's created. And if you think you can't, or if it's true that you can't, then of course this is something to be fearful of. Now, in recent history, as opposed to the dark satanic mills of Dickensian times, modern governments, including of course our own government, actively promote exchange from old jobs to new jobs through what's called structural assistance, retraining, helping people to relocate from one place to another. And so I think that when you take the whole package together, you recognise there are jobs that are being created while others are being destroyed, that governments engage themselves in structural assistance, then, frankly, this is something to be welcomed. It will lead to rising living standards and rising wages for current workers and their children and their grandchildren.
And so on the one hand, we've got this situation where people are anxious about the pace of change and what impact that might have on the labour market. On the other hand, we've got economists and others who are worried that the pace is too slow, that we're not automating and introducing technology and embedding it right across the economy fast enough. And that's one of the reasons that we're not seeing productivity pick up and therefore wages as well, driven by that. So what's happening here in terms of this kind of mismatch in pace?
It's an interesting mix, isn't it? Because, as you say, productivity growth has been slow, notwithstanding the fact that we've had some automation and even artificial intelligence already introduced. You can see it in different parts of the economy. But at the same time, and this is ironic, at the same time, you've got more people participating in the labour market than has ever been true, with the highest participation rate in the labour market that's ever been recorded. And the labour market is generating jobs, and the jobs that are being generated are full-time jobs, not part-time or casual or gig jobs as some people refer to them. It's overwhelmingly full-time jobs. So, a fear of innovation, and yet the labour market is creating full-time jobs, right? Full-time jobs in, as it were, the old types of jobs, old economy. Well, not necessarily, right? So it is nevertheless true that people can find themselves unable to take those full-time jobs, but there's enough people who are that, employers are saying, I can't get everyone I need.
What's your thoughts on how we kind of accelerate this idea of lifelong learning and what needs to fundamentally change in the system to bring that about?
Well, you did write about education being the key for skilling up. So again, in the 19th century, it quickly became clear that to go from the agricultural economy to the industrial economy, which is what the Industrial Revolution was all about, and people who were then displaced from farm work, because the farm work was being mechanised, right? So people who were reaping by hand and sowing by hand were being replaced by machines. They then flocked to the cities, and in order to be able to work in the factories, they needed, basic literacy to be able to read the instructions and communicate in a written form in many instances. So mass primary education was born, so people could count and read, right? Education is the key, but the difference between our circumstances now and then is that the pace of change has picked up. So it's one thing to have one in big industrial revolution, the invention of the steam engine and mechanization, and then electrification and so forth. All of that took place over 150 years. We're now in a period where the information revolution and AI and the latest round of innovations is much, much faster. So you say, okay, the key is still to provide people with the skills, that's right, but you can't do it sort of once in a lifetime because the process is not that slow. The half-life of what you've learnt, right, not everything, but it's certainly skill-based learning, is much, much shorter. So that gives birth to the idea that you would go in and out of the education system. Most people are used to workplace training, but the workplace you're in might not exist. You're going to need a new workplace, right? So the sort of skills that you need are generic skills that can help you move from one particular application to another, and the workplace will give you the application of those skills in a particular context. So the education system needs to be, as others have said before me, making sure that people are being trained with these skills: critical thinking, creativity to the extent that you can, teach that, collaboration. Much of the work is team-based these days. Communication, you need to be able to express yourself and communicate. And competition, you need to be alert to what competitive instincts actually drive in the labour market as well as the product market.
I think that's a fantastic summary of the key policy issues. So thank you for joining me,
Pleasure,
Professor
Jared.
Ian Harper.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.